There is no separation of church and state. It's a fabrication. It's a fiction. It's not in the Constitution. It's made up by secular humanists.
That was Charlie Kirk showing off why that big brain of his didn't get accepted into West Point. Maybe they rejected him because he doesn't understand what the Constitution says. Maybe didn't even take a single moment to read about it. But let's watch more of that video in context and see if there's any redeeming argument that he makes there.
Well, it's so sick because South American and Central American countries are actually very religious and very Catholic. So they're going into religious countries with almost missionary fervor to go and try to make these countries less religious. And again, there is no separation of church and state. It's a fabrication. It's a fiction. It's not in the Constitution. It's made up by secular humanists. It's derived from a single letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention. Of course, we should have church and state mixed together. Our founding fathers believed in that. We can go through the details of that. They established literally a church in Congress. Anyway, separate issue. The point, though, is that this is acting like a religion, though, isn't it? If we live by their own false premise of separation of church and state, then why on earth and how on earth why would they want to go bring this belief to other countries? I mean, they're almost kind of as if it was the 1400s and they're sending missionaries to the New World filled with despotic, nihilistic atheism and humanism. I mean, what's the thought process behind this?
So what is Charlie Kirk talking about there? Well, we'll get back to what the Constitution says in just a moment. Just ripping a page out of Lauren Boebert's book, I guess. Lauren Boebert getting dunked on relentlessly didn't discourage Charlie Kirk from making that stupid point. But before we get to that, what he's referring to is this insane idea that the Biden administration is giving government grants to countries that support atheism, that push for atheism. There is no evidence to that. Looked into the story, the only publication I saw covering it was, of course, Fox News. And there was nothing, not a shred of evidence indicating that the Biden administration, like Biden can't get up from his nap to defend women's reproductive rights. You really think Biden's gonna spend his time like traveling to other countries? Like, yo, buddy, I'm gonna give you some funds if you push atheism in your country. What? I will tell you though, right-wing evangelicals from America love to visit other countries and push for legislation that supports murdering people who don't have lifestyles they agree with. Yeah. Happened in Uganda back in 2012 when right-wing evangelicals who are part of the so-called family, the group that hosts the prayer breakfast, the national prayer breakfast every year, would go to, African countries and push for the death penalty, meaning execution for gay people. They almost got that passed, but there was enough international backlash that they backed off. But there are still penalties for gay people in Uganda. Thanks to evangelicals, who of course Charlie Kirk likes to rub elbows with. So if you want to have that conversation, we can have that conversation. But I'm guessing Charlie Kirk might need a minute or two to just read something before we engage in that. Like, get on my level, Charlie. There's a reason why West Point rejected you. You're lazy, you're tired. And you just regurgitate talking points that you've heard from literally the biggest lunatics in Congress. But look, I'm just name calling here. And when you name call, you automatically lose, right? You automatically lose the argument. So let me come with the receipts, because this person who for some reason can't stop twitching, his face is like a twitch fest. What's going on over here? What are you on? Maybe get off. Maybe read something and then come back on your show and then maybe you can tell us what the Constitution actually says. But if that's too much work for you, Charlie, I can do that for you here. Obviously, there is a separation of church and state. Obviously, that is what the founders of this country wanted. Let me give you some more evidence. I can't believe I have to do this as if we're in like a second grade history lesson. For the revolutionaries, political liberty was meaningless without religious liberty, and disestablishment, the separation of church and state, was necessary to guarantee freedom of the soul, the most precious of all liberties. Even before the Bill of Rights prohibited a state church, the framers of the Constitution had signaled their radical break with the past by refusing to require office holders to meet a religious test, that is, to subscribe to certain religious beliefs or even to believe at all. Seems counter to what Charlie Kirk said there. Weird. So do I believe what our history says, what our Constitution says, or do I believe some weird-faced twitching guy on some random show who's telling me that there was never a separation of church and state in this country? I don't know. You guys get to decide who's more credible. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom in 1786 made clear that the state would not support any churches or Christianity more generally, much less one faith. Thomas Jefferson, proud author of the law, argued that religion must be protected from the state and the state from religion because it was so essential to mankind's happiness and well-being. True religion could spread only by reason and persuasion, never by governmental edict. The First Amendment, Jefferson believed, enshrined this principle by building a wall of separation between church and state. First Amendment, fascinating. So what exactly does the First Amendment say? What does it say, Charlie? Let me give you a little reminder. Or maybe you'll hear this for the first time because maybe you haven't read the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the government deciding that one religion should rule the land is not something that the founders believed in. They didn't think that that was, something that you would have in a society that is free, a society that celebrates liberty. And I'm curious, so in Charlie's mind, what would happen? Okay, he's evangelical, he identifies as evangelical. So is he saying that as an evangelical, the government should force his religion on everyone else, including Jewish people, by the way? What does Ben Shapiro think about that? Hey Ben, you live in America, no separation of church and state, according to your buddy Charlie Kirk. So take the yarmulke off, not allowed, not allowed. Charlie gets to decide which religion all of us have to follow. Charlie gets to use his religion to dictate our lives in a country that's supposed to be free. All of this also was confirmed by the Supreme Court in multiple cases, okay? So 2 landmark Supreme Court cases, Cantwell v. Connecticut and Everson v. Board of Education, established free exercise and separation of church and state. I know it's a little weird because right now we have a Supreme Court that's not interested in interpreting the Constitution. They're much more interested in right-wing activism in the nation's highest court. But the original idea around the Supreme Court was that they would protect our constitutional rights. And that is what they did in these 2 very specific Supreme Court rulings, establishing free exercise and separation of church and state, respectively, as part of the liberty protected by the 14th Amendment's guarantee of due process of law. By incorporating them into the due process clause, the court allowed for these protections to restrain both state and federal governments. For the justices, these freedoms, like other First Amendment rights, were essential to the democratic process. Without the liberty to discuss, write, believe, and act, Americans could not participate effectively in governing themselves. So listen. You guys can decide for yourselves who's telling you the truth, who's right, who's wrong. You've got Charlie Kirk, who provides no receipts and just spouts nonsense about how there was never a separation of church and state. Or you can believe the argument I'm making, not because I'm pulling things out of my ass like Charlie does, but because I'm quoting the Constitution, giving you a little bit of that history, American history, which right-wingers want to prevent kids from learning in our schools by burning books and censoring certain curriculum they don't like. But if I still haven't made my case, if I'm not persuasive enough, let us remember Charlie Kirk getting confronted by someone who was curious about why Charlie Kirk was really rejected from West Point. So let's go to that confrontation.
My question is for Charlie. Charlie, I wanted to ask you about you trying to get into West Point. You said that you applied to West Point, but they gave your place to an applicant of a different gender and persuasion. I know the test scores and I knew the qualifications. She was less qualified. So my question is, if they were of a different gender, do you know what gender they were?
I never said that. That's fake news. Thanks for being here tonight.
Oh, it's fake news. I mean, it's super unfair to accuse Charlie of saying something that he didn't actually say. But did he say it? I don't know. Let's take a look.
Unfortunately, I was waitlisted and things kind of started to get a little bit odd, and I eventually lost my spot out to what I felt was a far less qualified applicant in my district that was of a different gender and a different persuasion. You could take it any way you want, but I knew the test scores, I knew the qualifications. I was kind of got the short end of the stick.
Looks like Charlie Kirk's a bit of a liar. Looks like Charlie Kirk can't be bothered to read the United States Constitution. Looks like Charlie Kirk, not only a reject for West Point, an embarrassment for the American people, doesn't love the country, doesn't understand the country, doesn't know a damn thing about the country. Sit down and shut up, Charlie. No one buys your BS.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.